Welcome to Helping to Reduce Self-Harming Behaviour 10 Steps for Better Management of Triggers, Stress, and Emotional Pain. Thank you for joining this webinar. Today we are going to discuss self-harming behaviours, which is an increasingly common mental health issue. Identifying self-harm as a mental health issue is actually important in beginning to understand the root of this behaviour. Contrary to what some people believe, self-harm is usually not a behaviour that is used to get attention from other people. Instead, the root of self-harm has a lot to do with emotional pain that is usually linked to an underlying mental health disorder. Before we dive in, just a quick introduction. This webinar is prepared by the Impulsivity Online Project team. Dr. Yulia Richard is a founder of the Impulsivity Project, and she has dedicated a large portion of her career to helping people who struggle with impulse control. You can find more information about our research and programs at impulsivity.com.au. And a quick disclaimer. This webinar is for educational purposes only and is in no way a substitute for mental health treatment. If you or someone you know is struggling with a mental health condition, you should seek the help of a licensed mental health professional. Self-harm refers to a range of different behaviours that cause intentional harm or injury to oneself. Examples of some of the most common forms of self-harm include cutting and burning the skin to create superficial wounds, and less common forms include carving into the skin, hitting or biting oneself, skin picking, or hair pulling. In most cases, the wounds and injuries that result from this behaviour do not require medical attention. Another common misconception about self-harm is that it is a suicidal behaviour or an attempt to end one's own life. Self-harm is not considered by most professionals to be a suicidal behaviour or a suicide attempt and is seen as a distinctly separate issue, although self-harm does increase a person's risk of suicide. Perhaps one of the strongest links that suicide and self-harming behaviours have is the rate at which they co-occur with diagnosed mental illnesses. Having a diagnosed mental illness increases a person's risk for both self-harm and suicide by a substantial amount. One of the most common mental illnesses that features self-harming behaviour as a symptom is borderline personality disorder. Research indicates that between 70 to 75% of people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder self-injure at some point, making it the psychiatric disorder with the highest rate of self-harming behaviours. Borderline personality disorder is a serious mental health condition where a person has trouble regulating their emotions and is prone to acting out in destructive and harmful ways. Some of these behaviours are self-harming or self-destructive, and others are aimed towards other people. Borderline personality disordered people often describe having significant trouble forming lasting, healthy relationships with other people. It is generally believed by mental health professionals that in most cases, borderline personality disorder develops in people who have suffered from traumatic experiences as children. Another diagnosis with a relatively high rate of self-harm is major depressive disorder. Major depressive disorder is a condition where people struggle with persistent feelings of sadness, are often tired and unmotivated, and have trouble motivating themselves to do even basic tasks. In people with this disorder, many describe having negative thoughts and feelings about themselves, their lives, and their futures. People who are depressed are more likely to self-harm and more likely to attempt suicide in their lifetime than people without depression. Other disorders which have higher risks of self-harming behaviours are eating disorders like anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. In these disorders, individuals have very restrictive eating patterns or alternate between binge eating and compensatory behaviours like purging, over-exercising, or caloric restriction. Some research indicates that as many as half or slightly more than half of patients with either of these disorders may have engaged in self-harming behaviour. Dissociative disorders, or disorders where people are likely to feel disconnected from their bodies or from their experiences, also carry higher risk of self-harm. Dissociative states are most common in people suffering from either post-traumatic stress disorder or borderline personality disorder. People who experience dissociative states often describe feeling separated from their bodies and use self-harm as a way to reconnect with their bodies and feel something. Other disorders which may increase the risk of self-harm but have not had as much research include substance and alcohol use disorders. As you can see, We make the point that self-harm is a mental health issue for a reason. This reason is that numerous research studies have indicated that self-harming behaviors are almost exclusively confined to people struggling with another diagnosed mental health condition. We also know that certain populations may be at higher risk of self-harm. Teens and young adults have the highest percentage of self-harming behaviors, with roughly equal amounts of young men and young women engaging in self-harm. The types of self-harm do vary somewhat between genders, with males being more likely to use burning or hitting themselves, and females being more likely to use either burning or cutting to harm themselves. College students also have a higher rate of self-harm. So why do people self-harm? By and large, researchers and mental health professionals agree that in the majority of instances, self-harm is used as a coping skill. People who self-harm often describe that their self-harming behaviors are closely related to their experience of difficult emotions like fear, sadness, or anger. People are more likely to self-harm when they experience these difficult emotions because they describe that self-harming does one or more of the following. Feels like an emotional release, allowing them to let go of these emotions. Makes the emotional pain they feel more real by giving it a physical place on the body. Is a way of expressing their emotional pain. Makes them feel less numb by making them feel something. Distracts them from difficult thoughts and feelings. Promotes a temporary feeling of euphoria similar to a drug. Punish themselves for a mistake or shortcoming. Feel more in control when feelings are out of control. People who do not self-harm might really struggle to understand why some people do self-harm, but it is quite similar to other negative coping skills like drugs, alcohol, or even binge eating, in that it is a way of escaping from or coping with stress and difficult feelings. In the short term, these negative coping skills seem to work because they do provide a temporary escape, distraction, or numbing of the stress and feelings. But in the long term, these behaviors tend to cause even more stress and problems than we had before we used them. For some, self-harming behaviors may even trigger the pain receptors in the brain, which causes the brain to release specific pain-relieving and pleasure-focused chemicals. This explanation helps people to understand that self-harming, like other forms of drug or alcohol use, is a behavior that is related to the reward centers in the brain. The term we often use to describe behaviors that are based on strong emotional urges, have an immediate reward, and lead to more problems and regrets later on, is impulsivity. An impulse is a sudden and strong urge to act. And impulsivity means acting on that urge in ways that cause problems or consequences later on. A number of behaviors like drinking, eating, sex, or even shopping could be forms of impulsivity if these behaviors lead to a person feeling guilty or experiencing consequences afterwards. There tends to be a cycle to impulsive behaviors that goes like this. A person encounters a trigger or stressor. This could be something external, like a fight with a friend or a stressful day at work. Or it could be something internal, like feelings of sadness or anger. These triggers and stresses lead to an urge to do something like self-harm, and impulsivity means acting on this urge. Acting on the urge to self-harm likely produces some kind of immediate reward, like a feeling of euphoria or maybe just an escape from pain. But later on, people tend to regret the decision to self-harm, maybe even feeling ashamed of the scars and having to cover or hide them from others. In this stage, it is common for people to make promises to others or to themselves to stop the behavior and do something different next time, but ultimately the cycle is repeated. The cycle is repeated because of the immediate reward it provides, which makes people think that the behavior is working because it is providing temporary relief or pleasure. But most people who self-harm or make other impulsive choices know deep down that the behavior is not actually working for them. Most people who get caught in this cycle are at least somewhat aware of the problems this cycle is causing, and on some level, they want to stop. When they feel guilty and make promises to change, they usually genuinely do intend to stop or change, but have not developed the skills to know how to deal with triggers or stress differently. Step 1. Understand why you self-harm. The good news is that it is possible to develop the skills to break the cycle of impulsive behaviors like self-harm. The first step to starting is often to build awareness about this pattern of behavior and understand why you continue to repeat it. You could think about previous times when you have self-harmed and think about the thoughts, feelings, or triggers that you were experiencing at this time, which will help you understand what you are using self-harm to cope with. Most people identify that they are most likely to self-harm when they are experiencing intense, difficult emotions like sadness, fear, anger, shame, or resentment. During these times, people tend to describe that their feelings take over and feel completely overwhelming, and self-harm is one of the only things that has helped these feelings feel less overwhelming. Step 2. Identify why you want to change. After you have identified triggers for self-harm, another important step is to identify motivators for change, or reasons why you want to stop self-harming. Making a list of problems that self-harm has caused for you can help remind you that while self-harm feels like a solution in the short term, it causes a lot of problems in the long term. These consequences might include lowered self-esteem, feeling self-conscious about scars, and feeling guilty or ashamed after self-harming. Step 3. Self-monitor thoughts and feelings. Once you have an understanding of why you self-harm and why it is not working for you, the next step is to self-monitor. Self-monitoring means paying attention to our emotional state and our thoughts and feelings throughout the day so we can notice the first signs of stress or difficult emotions. A good way to be more aware of emotions is to regularly stop and ask yourself, what am I feeling throughout the day? Setting a reminder on your phone to help you remember to do this, or even to regularly record your thoughts and feelings using a daily log. One of the reasons this is important is that it helps you be more aware and connected to your emotional state, and also can help you begin to be more aware of what types of situations and activities lead to positive feelings and which lead to difficult feelings. Step 4. Avoid acting at the top of your emotions. Feelings occur on a spectrum. We might be slightly annoyed, frustrated, or completely furious, and most would agree that these look and feel very different, although all are different levels of anger. Other feelings, including the ones which typically lead to self-harming, also occur on a spectrum, and most people say that they are more likely to self-harm when they feel very high levels of these emotions. For example, a person is more likely to self-harm when they are completely devastated, rather than just a little sad. What this means is that you can work to understand the levels of your emotions and avoid making any choices or decisions at the top levels of your emotions. Step 5. Find new outlets or ways to express feelings. People who use self-harm as an emotional expression or outlet might find that they need to find a new way to express these emotions. Keeping a journal is helpful to many people in giving them a safe outlet to express their thoughts and feelings, and is something that most everyone can add to their routine. Other people who are more creative might find that artistic expressions are helpful to them and find that they can communicate their feelings through music, poetry, painting, or some other form of art. Other people find that a physical outlet is really helpful to them in letting go and releasing difficult thoughts or feelings. Activities like running, biking, lifting weights, or engaging in sports are all examples of physical outlets. Step 6. Rely on your support system. Other people find that reducing their self-harming behaviors is easier when they feel supported by people in their life who care about them. Turning to these supports during times of stress or difficulty can provide a lot of comfort to people struggling with intense, difficult emotions, but shouldn't be the only method of coping. There will be times when these supports are not available or may not respond in the way that you want them to, meaning that you will have to use other skills and strategies to help calm down. Step 7. Change your mindset. Psychologists also understand that intense emotions are usually made up, in part, by specific types of thoughts. Certain thoughts are linked to certain emotions and can actually make those emotions stronger and more intense. For example, thoughts like, I can't believe she did that to me. After all I've done for her. She never even thanked me once, are all examples of thoughts that might feed into and intensify feelings of anger or resentment towards another person. Continuing to repeat and ruminate over these types of thoughts is likely to intensify the emotion. Other types of thoughts, like, no one really cares about me, it doesn't matter what happens to me, or I'll always be alone, are examples of thoughts that might feed into and intensify feelings of sadness or loneliness. The more these thoughts are focused on, the more intense the emotion becomes. Part of a treatment style called cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on how to shift the attention away from these emotional thoughts and begin thinking in more helpful, productive, and positive ways. Sometimes it is possible to interrupt and rethink our thoughts with a more positive thought. For instance, the thought, I can't believe she did that to me, might be interrupted with a thought like, maybe she was just having a stressful day and it wasn't intentional. Or a thought like, no one really cares about me, could be interrupted with a thought like, I do have people in my life who care about me, but sometimes I push them away instead of letting them close to me because it's easier. Notice how these new thoughts offer a different perspective which challenges the initial thought. Often, the goal of CBT is to challenge unhelpful thoughts by presenting other, more rational thoughts. Step 8. Use mindfulness. Still, some people who struggle with emotional thoughts might find that rethinking thoughts to change them into more positive or helpful thoughts isn't that easy, especially when they are really emotional. For people who find that the CBT skill of rethinking or reframing thoughts isn't as helpful to them, they may benefit from a different kind of approach. Instead of focusing on stopping and changing unhelpful thoughts, some people find it easier to just not give them as much attention when they come up. For instance, instead of ruminating and repeating these thoughts over and over, a person might simply notice the thought and redirect their mind to think of something else, or to switch their focus to whatever they are doing in the moment. There will be times when emotions are still intense and difficult, and bring strong urges to self-harm. In some moments, the skills you have learned may not be as helpful or might not be accessible to you at the moment when you need them. Learning that you can experience a strong and intense emotion without making an impulsive choice is another essential step in regulating emotions. Think of strong emotions like waves inside of you. Some might be big and scary, but all of the waves follow the pattern of rising, cresting, falling, and subsiding. Being still and letting the wave come and go inside of you will sometimes be your best option. By practicing this, you will learn that you are stronger than the waves and that you can remain in control of your actions no matter how big the wave is. These skills are part of a larger practice called mindfulness. Step 9. Be kind to yourself. Most people who self-harm describe having negative views or feelings about themselves either before, during, or after they self-harm. The very nature of self-harm is a lack of respect and kindness towards ourselves and our bodies, so it makes sense that part of recovery will probably mean changing the way we view and feel about ourselves. We can do this by learning to be kind to ourselves and using self-compassion instead of self-criticism. Instead of beating yourself up about a mistake you made, try being kind and talking to yourself the way you would talk to someone you care about. Instead of being self-critical and noticing all of our flaws or shortcomings, try making a list of things you like about yourself and adding to it each day. These small practices help to develop self-compassion, which is a way of being kind and forgiving to ourselves. Step 10. Reward your progress. Many people are quick to notice their failures, but tend to overlook their successes. Change is difficult, and stopping self-harming behaviors is about more than not hurting yourself. It is about learning new ways to cope with your emotions, which certainly isn't easy. Stopping self-harming behaviors and using other, healthier ways to cope is a sign of you becoming emotionally stronger and more resilient, which is definitely something to celebrate. Find a way to reward yourself for your progress at a certain milestone. For example, you could plan to buy yourself something you've really wanted after going a month without self-harming. These rewards can also help to keep you motivated and on track with your goals. The good news is that most people find that using skills like these to interrupt and change impulsive behaviors is something that becomes easier over time. Our brains have amazing abilities to change in response to our behaviors, so doing something different actually creates different pathways in the brain that makes us more likely to repeat these behaviors. In the same way that bad habits can be formed, they can also be broken, and new, good habits can be formed in their place. When we stop an old behavior like self-harm, it will probably be hardest in the beginning of making this change because we are fighting against the old pathway in the brain. But as we avoid this old path over and over, it starts to fade away, and the new pathway eventually becomes the habit. If you are someone who uses self-harming behaviors in difficult or stressful times, it is important for you to know that there are resources to help you. It may be difficult to imagine now, but there are a lot of people who used to use self-harming behaviors who now describe that they are able to cope and deal with their emotions in healthier ways. Sometimes it is possible to do so on your own by making use of educational resources like this, and sometimes it will be important to also see a licensed medical or mental health professional to treat any underlying mental health disorders. Mental health disorders like depression, PTSD, or borderline personality disorders are increasingly being studied more, meaning that there are a wider range of professionals who know about these disorders and can help link people to services and treatment, and also that many of the services and treatments available for these disorders have been proven to be effective. While taking the first step to get help or treatment for a mental health condition can be difficult, most people who have taken this step describe being glad they did. Thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar, and feel free to check out some of our other programs to manage impulsive behaviors, as well as free worksheets and resources, which can be found at impulsivity.com.au.